Welcome back. Last time we were talking about understanding and the good and the 10 characteristics of the good. So let's see where we've been. We've been kind of escalating, seeking the good from reason to meaning, from meaning to truth, from truth to knowledge, from knowledge to understanding, and now we want to go into wisdom. Wisdom is the application of what we understand. And particularly, we want to know how to choose. Remember, ethics is concerned with choice. Choice assumes values. Values assumes the highest value, which is the good. So how do we act and choose for the good in every circumstance of life? So that's what we want to talk about now. And we're going to be looking for universal moral principles, kind of like what Kant was looking for in the categorical imperative. Remember, he said we should only will those things to be universal, what we could make into like a moral law for everyone. So we want to see, can we, based on human nature, arrive at a moral law that we could apply to all people? That's what we want to do, and lots of ethicists have been looking for this. What are more universal moral principles that we can apply to all people? Now remember, a moral law is not the same as a legal code. Legal codes assume a moral law, and sometimes we talk about law, we use that word law, we can get confused. So it's not a deterministic physical law, and it's not merely a civil law or a legal code. It's a moral law, which is a law of human choice, human activity. So something can be immoral but legal, right? And something could be legal but immoral. Those don't always line up. So we want to know about what ought I to do? What am I morally obligated to do? And what am I morally held accountable for? Those are the kinds of things we're looking for in ethics. Okay, so maybe this is what's called morality now, when we get to the moral law. We also spent some time talking about the connection between a moral absolute and a metaphysical absolute. We talked about views of metaphysics that assume that all is one. We looked at whether matter is eternal and is the only thing, whether the soul exists, is the soul eternal, or does my soul exist in a temporal way? Is there a creator of all the things that are temporal? And we had a little discussion about God. We're going to talk a little bit more about that today, because this first application, thinking is presuppositional, is going to be applied to the first major division among human beings. Remember, we talked about humans are rational political animals, and that's a universal. But we also talked about how human beings have presuppositions, and we presuppose views of reality. Either all is eternal or only some is eternal, and we're majorly divided over that. And then those who believe only some is eternal, God the Creator, are disagreeing among themselves as well. They're divided. So we want to talk about those divisions today, because people's beliefs affect their choices and affects their actions and affects all the rest of us. So there's something called the ethics of belief. We want to touch on that a little bit today. So let's look at this application. Thinking is presuppositional. Human beings are divided over the existence or non-existence of God. Either God exists or God does not exist, and we disagree about this. Those who believe in God are divided among themselves. Among theists, who say God creates and rules and gives scripture, and deists, who say God creates, does not rule, and does not give scripture. That's a division. And then within theism, there's a division between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They all affirm God creates, God rules, God gives scripture, but they're going to disagree over the nature of God. That's going to be one of our main applications of this principle. Can there be unity among human beings in the good if there's a lack of unity about the existence or non-existence of God? Remember, the good the good assumes a view of human nature, and our view of human nature assumes a view of what is eternal, what is real. So we can't get away from doing metaphysics. Now, let's look at the way that this moral law is organized. I borrowed this from my professor. He has organized it this way: origin, nature, law, application, and consequences. So we'll call that ONLAC. Origin, nature, law, applications, consequences. For each law, we see that this applications are not exhaustive. It's some applications. We could do more. And if we thought about the principles, we would know how to apply the principles. That's part of wisdom, right? Knowing the principles and knowing how to apply the principles. All right, let's look at the origin of this moral law on thinking is presuppositional. All human beings as rational beings think. That's self-evident. It's self-evident that we think. And if you want to doubt it, you will be thinking about doubting it, right? You can't not think. It's self-evident that we think. Now, here's the nature of thinking, though. Thinking is presuppositional, meaning we think of the more basic first and then the less basic. We think of the less basic in light of the more basic. Now, think about how we've been going through this class. Reason, meaning, truth, knowledge, understanding, wisdom. That's presuppositional. When we talked about reason, we say we form concepts, judgments, arguments. That's presuppositional. And the nature of this thinking is presuppositional is elucidated a little bit further in the next point under nature. We think of the less basic in light of the more basic. For example, reason is more basic than meaning. Meaning is more basic than truth. Premises in an argument are more basic than the conclusion in an argument. Our basic belief is more basic than the meaning of our experience, which we interpret in light of our basic belief. Infinite and eternal is more basic than finite and temporal. So we can see that there is an order to our thinking. When we're doing it well, we do think that way. And there's an ethical component. We ought to think that way. We ought to deal with more basic questions first, and then less basic questions. So we've been doing epistemology before metaphysics, metaphysics before ethics. So we have been applying this. Okay, here's the law. Now I want you to think about this. Is this something we could make a universal moral law? In discussion with others, more basic issues should be addressed prior to addressing less basic issues. We should seek agreement on the more basic first. If we agree on the more basic, we will agree on the less basic. Okay, now think about it. Don't just reject it or accept it. Think critically about it. See if this is something we want to make a universal moral principle. I do. I would like to have this be applied in every aspect of life. Let's deal with more basic issues first. Now we're going to take this principle and apply it to this disagreement over whether God exists or not, and what is God like if God does exist, and why are these theists divided among themselves. Also, I'll just leave it there. Let's look at the applications. Human beings have a concept of God. So we can conceive of a being who is infinite, eternal, unchangeable in being, wisdom, power, holiness, justice, goodness, truth. That's a classic definition of a theistic God. So we have that concept, okay? Not everyone believes in God, but we have the idea of God. Theists, those who believe in God the Creator, are divided over the question of God's justice and goodness. So the first division, is there a God or not? Second division, when there is a God, what is God like? And Judaism, Christianity, Islam are all divided over this question of God's justice and goodness. The justice of God says humans are in this condition of moral evil, and it would be just to leave them in that condition. There are consequences. If you don't use reason, then you don't find meaning. It would be just for God to leave humans in that condition, right? Goodness is connected to God's mercy, and mercy says don't leave them in that condition, call them back. And that's what we talked about. Natural evil is a callback. So God is just. Let them have punishment, and the punishment is meaninglessness, boredom, and guilt. And he's merciful. Call them back. And natural evil is a callback. Now, how is it possible for God to be infinitely just, pay, and infinitely merciful, don't pay? That's where the theists are divided in answering that question. So, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are divided over the issue of how God's justice is satisfied. Okay, so they agree he's just, but how is sin or moral evil to be paid for? So the first division is the difference between what's called vicarious atonement or no atonement. So on the side of no atonement is Islam. On the side of vicarious atonement is Judaism and Christianity. Vicarious atonement means someone else pays the penalty. So they pay in your place. Now, those who agree to vicarious atonement, Judaism and Christianity, are divided over how that happens. So is it by a representative, someone representing humans, or is it not representative? So this idea of representative is someone else in our place, takes our place and pays. So in Christianity, this would be Jesus. Jesus paid the penalty for humanity to be forgiven. In Judaism, they've gotten away from this idea of a representative paying the penalty. So now it's maybe something, the nation of Israel, the suffering of the nation of Israel, the suffering of the individual, the obedience of the individual pays. There is still a recognition that it has to be paid somehow. So they're divided. Can we get the best minds in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam to sit down and discuss this major division and see if they could make progress by using the presuppositional method? It's idealistic, but I don't see why it's not possible. I think it is possible, and we should expect it, hope for it, work for it. So here's some more applications. Those who act on the basis of theistic beliefs affect our world. Many have died for their beliefs. Many are fighting now over these beliefs. And it affects all of us. So it does seem like a moral imperative for them to come to some method for settling this dispute among themselves. And I think it should probably be applied to all of us, if we're being honest. Not just the theists, but the theists in particular in this application. Beliefs about the existence or non-existence of God affect all persons. So here's all of us. Either you believe in God or you don't. And if we don't, we should discuss why not. And the next point, all persons ought to have rational justification for their belief or non-belief in God prior to acting in the world. We're all acting right now, but we don't really have rational justification for our belief or non-belief. Rational justification for basic beliefs is more basic than rational justification for ethics. So here we are doing an ethics class. We haven't done metaphysics. We should pause. Hey, you know what? We should have like a global timeout. We are having a global timeout right now. We should say nobody gets to go back to work. Nobody gets to go back to action until we settle this dispute. Wouldn't that be awesome? Maybe that's what a global timeout is about, for us to think about this dispute in particular. Does God exist or not? Why are you guys fighting over this? Why can't you just take this idea, thinking is presuppositional, apply it, and see if we can get an answer to this question? All right, if we don't, the consequences are dire. Look at this. Consequences. Division, this major division, leads to decay and collapse of the culture. I think that's what we're seeing around us right now. Unity leads to cultural growth in the good for generations. So my experience is that there are people who are raised theists and they walk away from theism because their questions haven't been answered by their elders. And we should say it's not the maybe fault of theism, but those who practice theism and haven't understood it in its basic sense and can't explain it to the young people to their satisfaction. And so people leave it, and so the culture becomes divided. And we go, well, I have the option of being an atheist in a free country like the United States. In other places, you don't have that option. And in other places, you don't have the option to be a theist. So, for example, communist China, they aren't going to really allow people to openly believe in God. So this is a question that divides all of humans. But unity, particularly on this issue, leads to cultural growth in the good for generations. Why? Because if people agree on the most basic things, they'll agree on what the good is. And if we agree on what the good is, then we could work together for the good, for the accomplishment and achievement of the good. So this moral law has very wide-reaching, very important consequences, important for us today. All right, so I hope you will think about this moral law. Thinking is presuppositional. This isn't the only application, but this is the one I'm highlighting because we just talked about God in the previous conversation, and it is one we don't really get to touch upon much in this class, but you should be thinking about it. All right, so we're trying to settle disputes in this one between huge groups of people. Those who believe in God and those who don't, and then those who do believe in God, which probably makes up more than 50% of the world population. So, from here, we're going to look at applications to ourself. Can we find unity in ourself? Is that a more basic piece to look for? Can we have unity in ourself? So that's where we're going next. We're going to look at integrity. All right. Thank you for watching.